Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're coming back, welcome back. So in my last video, I realized after I had posted it that I had made a specific claim about Teal Swan, and I hadn't actually given any evidence for it. So I did also say in that video that I was not going to be responding to any more of her content because I find it personally distressing. But unfortunately, I have to comment on this particular video because it's the video where I found an instance of what looks like plagiarism. So I'm going to play the excerpt from that video where I believe she plagiarized Dr. John Gottman. Now, if you haven't heard of the Gottman Institute, that's essentially his research business and the place that does a lot of training for counselors and people like that. So I'm going to juxtapose her video with excerpts from the Gottman Institute website so you can see for yourself what they have published in the way of research and terminology that they have actually coined for the models and the constructs that they have theorized themselves.
Aren't being met. Now, communication verbally is, of course, preferable, but there's a lot of communication that happens non-verbally. Now, one thing you have to understand in order to maintain a healthy relationship is the idea of bids for affection. All day, every day, we basically give bids to people in our life for connection with them. These bids can look like a great many things. For example, we may inch up closer to our partner, or crack a joke, or do their laundry for them. We do any number of things that essentially say, hey, I really want to connect with you right now. Now, what we do as people is we don't usually acknowledge those bids. We don't even recognize them. But when we do recognize them, we have a choice between three ways of dealing with it. The first is we completely and intentionally ignore that bid for affection. The second is we turn against that bid for affection, meaning we push it away in some way. We become the antagonist to that bid. And we say, I don't care whether you have that need. Shachink, I'm going to basically oppose that need. Or we turn towards the need and allow the connection to occur. Obviously, the relationships that are the most successful long-term are the ones where two people turn towards each other's bids for connection. Now, this applies to every relationship in your life, whether it's a friendship, a relationship with your daughter, your mother, or your significant other.
So the video that was from, if you saw the little bit at the start, is called Why Do People Cheat? Which is kind of ironic because it looks like she cheated in that video. But at the same time that I kind of have to comment on the content of that video, something else came up in the YouTube verse, if you will. One of the Try Guys got exposed for an affair with one of his employees. And the fallout from that has been extensive. Essentially, he lost his job, he lost his share in a business, he may lose his family, he's lost friendships, he's lost business deals, he's also compromised his own brand because his entire brand was his relationship.
My wife, 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 my wife.
And now he's been exposed as a bit of a fraud in that department. And so when you build your brand on loving your wife and then it turns out that you don't love your wife and you actually treat her with contempt, yeah, it's not good. It's not good for business. So in today's video, we're going to talk about cheating. Now, according to Teal Swan's video on cheating, which I actually watched through twice because I was trying to verify whether or not she actually referenced John Gottman or even referenced psychology in general, like prefacing the use of someone else's work with psychology says or Gottman says or anything, and there was literally nothing, and there was also absolutely zilch in the description box. So I went through her video twice, unfortunately, and it was just as icky the second time around as it was the first time around, and it was nauseating the first time around. According to Teal, if someone cheats on you, that is your fault for not fulfilling all of their emotional needs. And she also says that jealousy is a social construct. It's a moralistic invention. And she uses this New Age psychobabble about, at our highest vibration is unity, and unity is the essence of oneness. So according to this New Age philosophy of oneness and everyone being all one at their highest self, it's kind of like this excuse for spiritual teachers to go, you know what? The lines between you and me, there is no line, which means we should have sex. And you know how there's no lines between you and me? Well, that means that all those things that you own, I also own them. Give me your stuff. So it's essentially a way to scam people. If Teal Swan actually has studied psychology on the down low and then repackaged it as her own spiritual work, then surely she would know the research on cheating, which is that it's actually got a biological underpinning to it. So when someone responds with jealousy to either the threat of cheating or finding out actual cheating, there's a hardwired biological response, which is essentially disgust.
This study, for example, which looked at the connection between microbes, mating, and morality, and what the proposed evolutionary function of these domains of disgust actually serve, like what purpose do they serve? And it does seem to play a role in relationships, and it is based around someone's personality. For example, if someone has a personality disorder, like borderline. As it says in this article, where it outlines the issues around sex with borderline personality disorder, it says impulsive behaviour is one of the symptoms of BPD, listed in the DSM-5. In the case of sexuality, a trend toward impulsive behaviour may lead to reckless sexual behaviour as well. People with BPD are most at risk of engaging in impulsive acts when they are experiencing intense emotional responses or when they are disinhibited by alcohol or other substances. Intense sadness, fear, jealousy, or positive emotions may also lead to impulsive sexuality. In addition to engaging in reckless and impulsive sex, there is evidence that people with BPD are more prone to promiscuity. This differs from impulsive sex in that promiscuity is the act of intentionally having multiple sexual partners, rather than having casual sex on a whim. Why might people with BPD be more promiscuous? One possibility is that they may use sex to combat feelings of emptiness that are associated with the disorder. When feeling empty, numb, lonely, or bored, sex may generate positive emotional responses. Essentially, it's part of their fix, it's part of their addictive personality that they need input from other people, including sexual.
For a lot of people, if they find out that someone has cheated on them, the first sensation that they feel is nauseated, and then in some situations they might actually throw up. Why do they throw up? Because cheating is potentially carrying pathogens into their body. Throwing up is the body's way of protecting itself from pathogens, and cheating is a gateway for pathogens. which is also kind of why all of those free love hippie types tend to be a little bit low in personal hygiene, because they have a lower disgust threshold, or should I say higher. It's like their tolerance for grossness is so high that it borderlines on hazardous for their health. So if you're dating someone and you notice that like their personal hygiene is a little bit iffy and the way that they keep their room or their house is a bit gross, that could be a red flag. On the flip side, if someone is really, really finicky and maybe a little bit OCD, that is also a red flag, because they might become like extremely jealous. One of the manifestations of OCD is actually an extreme form of jealousy, where someone obsesses about their partner having potentially kissed anyone. Like, even if they date virgins, they still have issues. Like there is literally, it's the same thing as washing their hands 50 times in an hour, but it's the other person. So the other person is never clean enough. And so they can end up accusing their partner of cheating in the most irrational and damaging ways. So like with most things in psychology, you don't really want to be at either end of the bell curve because it's probably going to give you issues with relationships and issues with functioning, and yeah, it will impact your life. But it's interesting with Teal Swan's video about cheating, because she quotes John Gottman essentially, without referencing him or attributing his work to him. But while she is quoting his work, she has also missed a substantial point of the research that he actually found. She talks about turning towards, turning against, and turning away, which are the three possible ways that you can respond to a bid for connection according to the Gottman Institute. But she kind of only applies it to the person who has been cheated on. So the person who has been wronged is wrong for not always, no matter what, receiving their partner positively, even though usually with someone who cheats, there's a whole pattern of behaviour that leads up to that, if not starts out with that. Like a friend of mine, she was dating a guy for 2 weeks and he cheated. She forgave him and he continually cheated for the entire relationship that they were together. And I think they were together for over a year. And the thing that actually made her decide to leave was catching a venereal disease. At no point was any of that her responsibility or her fault. The only fault she had was being a forgiving person, which isn't even a bad thing. But unfortunately, bad people take advantage of people who are forgiving, and ultimately that's on them. But bids for connection are a two-way street. If you bid in a way that's really condescending or demeaning or antagonistic or hostile, then how is the other person supposed to respond? Connection is a two-way street all the time. Not some of the time, all the time, because you cannot force someone to connect with you. They either choose to connect with you, or they choose to alienate you. And it's this mutual choosing which is the underpinning of bids and how they are received and reciprocated. Our concept of marriage is very different these days to how it has historically been for a very long time. And I'm not saying that historically it was perfect, because human beings have always been terrible to each other. But historically speaking, marriage was always seen as a lifelong commitment. It wasn't something you could easily get out of. So people didn't just meander aimlessly into marriage. They carefully selected and specifically chose the other person because they knew they would be stuck with them. So marriage is supposed to be specifically choosing another person and then vowing to continually choose that person on an ongoing basis, on a regular basis, over and above everyone else and everything else. But these days, relationships are all about, maybe, we'll see, which is acceptable for the dating phase. Dating is supposed to be the period of time when you discern whether or not someone is actually going to be able to fit into your future. And then when you choose them based on careful research. But people have a tendency these days to view relationships as like convenient for the time being. It's like, well, I can't really afford to rent on my own, so it kind of makes sense for us to just move in together, and also then we don't need to travel and we can make a bit less effort with each other, so like it just makes sense. And then after they've moved in together, they're like, oh, I didn't realize that this person thought this about this thing, or I didn't realize that this person had dreams of doing that, or I didn't realize that this person had such a terrible bad habit, or I didn't realize that this person really doesn't care about me whatsoever. But now we've got a lease together, and now we've bought a dog, and now we have shared bank accounts. So splitting all of that up is gonna be really painful, and I'd rather not have to deal with it. And I mean, they're okay. They're kind of tolerable, I guess. And because we've been so lazy, I'm kind of a little bit out of shape, and I'm getting older, so my options are kind of dwindling. Well, they'll do. There is nothing more depressing than essentially hearing from someone or getting the impression from someone that you'll do, instead of actually hearing from someone, I am choosing you, and I am going to keep choosing you for the rest of our lives. And that actually brings me to the biblical definition of love, but also the biblical definition of hate, because it's really interesting how those words were used in the original language, and how the English translation sort of misses some of the meaning, but also kind of fits. So there's a passage in the Bible which says, Jacob I have loved, Esau I have hated. And a lot of people are like, wait a minute, God hates people? I thought God was love. And then there's all of these other passages from Jesus where he says you need to hate your father and mother, but then he also says you need to love your enemies.
If anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you.
And according to Bible scholars, it's because our translation into English doesn't quite capture the meaning of those two words, both love and hate. Because essentially, love means to choose, and hate means to not choose. You could translate hatred as rejection. So in the Bible, neither love nor hate actually have much to do with feelings or emotions. They're not emotional words, they're action words. They imply a certain set of behaviours. And we get an example of this in Matthew, where Jesus says,
No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money.
And we have another example in Ephesians chapter 5.
Husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it. Let each one of you love his wife as himself.
So when you take all of these Bible passages into context, you get the idea that the words love and hate mean something a little bit different to how we apply them in English today. When Jesus says that you cannot serve two masters, essentially what he's saying is you cannot be faithful to two competing interests. So if you have two things that are essentially at odds with each other, conflicting with each other, or in competition with each other, you will inevitably choose one of them. And that's the one that you end up being faithful to. And when it comes to human nature, we tend to be the most faithful to our own selfish interests. And that is exactly what you see with Ned Fulmer from the Try Guys. And there's a really interesting example of this, which I will show you very briefly in this clip.
I took the video offline. I didn't tell anybody. They noticed.
Zach, imagine how you felt yesterday. I felt the exact same way, and now I also have had my project ripped off the internet by my friend. I worked for months on that project, and my wife was getting the brunt of the cyberbullying. I think that you're overreacting, and I think we should put it back up and maybe consider, if you're really worried about it, disabling the comments section.
I scrolled through the comments, and normally I'm the first person to say that this is a minority. It's all of them. It's what people are saying.
It's not.
It's every tweet I've got.
So in this video, you can see Zach talking at the start, and then Ned telling him that his content is more important than his wife's well-being. When your co-worker is more concerned about the welfare of your wife than you are, something is very, very wrong with that situation. A man who is prepared to throw his wife under the bus for content is essentially a hoe. He's either an attention hoe, like he needs constant validation from other people, which kind of fits the profile of someone who cheats, or he's a hoe for money, like a traditional hoe. But either way, his price is way too low. And personally, I think it comes back to that concept which was discussed in Ephesians chapter 5, where if a man hates his own wife and they are essentially one flesh, then he probably has issues with self-loathing. People who have issues with self-loathing often struggle to value love because they don't think that they deserve it. And the easiest way to deal with that is to devalue it and to devalue anyone who offers it. And because they don't think that they deserve love, then they think that the only way that they can obtain love is through dishonest means, like manipulation. They can't be authentic, and they have this sense of imposter syndrome in a relationship. They can't reciprocate real love because they know that deep down inside they're a fraud. They are defrauding the other person, so they don't believe that that love being offered to them could possibly be real because they're not being real in the first place. So how is someone supposed to love them when they never show who they are? And of course, faking it all the time is a bit unsustainable. Like, eventually the mask slips and their real personality bursts out of the seams. It's kind of like wearing a corset for too long. And because they have essentially defrauded the other person and conned them into a relationship, they start to think of that person as being stupid. So they start treating that person with contempt. And it's all about the devaluation phase of the relationship, where they need the other person to be stupid so that essentially what they're losing isn't really that valuable to begin with. And so they don't have the same sense of loss when the relationship is imploded, and it's usually them who does the imploding. Their version of love is kind of like play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And I think it's really sad when people are like that, because they miss out on something that they know deep down that they want and that they need, but they just go about getting it in the worst possible ways, and then they wonder why it doesn't work. In 1 John chapter 4, there's a passage which lots of Christians are familiar with, which says that perfect love casts out fear. And a lot of people are afraid of love, because love is when someone actually sees you. They see you in your most private, intimate moments. They see you warts and all. And if they love you, they don't reject you. Instead, they see you and they choose you. Real love is secure and enduring because both people are honest with each other, both people are transparent, and both people are actively and consciously choosing each other. They're not just wandering into a relationship out of convenience or desperation or just to fill in time or to perhaps help their career. And because they have specifically chosen each other with full knowledge of who the other person is, then they are able to trust that the other person's love is real and that it will continue to choose them. And if you're wondering what one of the biggest tests of faithfulness actually is, it's not the bad times, it's actually the successes. As I mentioned before, people get into relationships and they stay in relationships because they can't afford to separate, or they don't have anywhere else to go, or they don't feel like anyone is going to pick them and they don't want to be alone, so they're like, oh well, I guess I'll just stay here. The old saying that a man is only as faithful as his options also applies to women, but it's an old saying because it's true. Someone who is a bit meh about you will generally lean on you in hard times. They might bail on you when you're having a tough time, but it kind of depends. But they will definitely bail if they suddenly are very successful, have a lot of money, have a lot of options, or perhaps they look a certain way, or they become appealing to other people, because that's when someone might decide that they don't need you anymore. Or they might feel like you have served your purpose, and your purpose was just about giving them a step up in life. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on this particular subject, because yeah, there's a lot of different opinions on cheating. There's a lot of different findings in research, so it's not conclusive, and I don't think it's like one size fits all, but a propensity for cheating and doing it in such a bold, open fashion, yeah, that does kind of display a level of contempt and hatred for the other person, for the other people, not just the spouse, but also the people that they're actually cheating with. It shows a lack of regard for the other person's feelings and a lack of regard for their own integrity. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.